Tom lived in a quiet town where the land was wide and open. His house stood close to a calm lake, a lake that had been part of his family's land for many years. On the far side of the water was a thick line of trees, and beyond those trees, the town had slowly grown busier. But Tom's side of the lake remained simple. Birds sang early in the morning, fish rippled the surface, and the air always smelled fresh after rain. Across the lake, a small wooden bridge stretched from Tom's land to the far shore. It was not a grand bridge, only a strong walkway of planks and posts. Yet for Tom it was more than just a bridge. His father had built it when Tom was a child. Tom remembered helping to carry boards, watching his father hammer each nail with steady hands. It had been part of his childhood, part of his family's life, and part of the land itself. Every morning, Tom crossed that bridge to fish on the opposite bank. Sometimes he took his grandson with him. The boy loved to run across the boards and laugh as the water splashed below. At sunset, Tom often stood in the middle of the bridge and looked at the golden light stretching across the water. To him, it was a place of peace, memory, and quiet strength. For years no one had complained about the bridge. It was well built and safe. Tom repaired loose boards whenever needed. But things changed when the local homeowners association, or HOA, took charge of the properties near the far side of the lake. The HOA had big plans. They wanted to build a luxury resort with fancy houses, wide decks, and a platform where visitors could swim. They wanted the area to look clean, modern, and costly. One day, Tom received a letter from the HOA. The letter said that his wooden bridge did not meet the style of the community and that it was unsafe. Tom read the letter twice and shook his head. The bridge had stood strong for decades. He had crossed it hundreds of times. His grandson had run across it many mornings. Not once had it broken or caused harm. Tom decided to meet the HOA leaders and explain. At the next board meeting, Tom sat across from 3 members. They wore neat suits and spoke in careful words. Tom told them the bridge was safe and part of his family's land. He explained how it carried history, how it was maintained, and how it was not their right to touch it. But the board members did not care about his story. They nodded politely and repeated that the bridge did not match the look they wanted for the resort. They said it had to go. Tom went home feeling heavy inside. He thought they would listen. He thought they might understand the meaning of the bridge. But they only cared about appearances and money. He walked down to the lake that evening and touched the handrail of the bridge. It felt solid under his palm. He hoped the board would change its mind and leave it alone. Days passed without more letters, and Tom began to think the matter was finished. Then one morning, while the air was still cool, Tom woke to a strange sound. It was the low grind of heavy machines. His grandson was already at the window, pointing with wide eyes. "Grandpa, look," the boy said. Tom hurried outside. Across the water, bright machines stood near the bridge. Workers in yellow helmets were moving quickly. A long arm of metal reached down and pulled at the wooden posts. Boards snapped in half. Nails screeched as they were torn from the beams. The bridge shuddered and cracked. "Stop," Tom shouted, running to the shore. His voice echoed across the water, but the machines kept working. The workers were not listening to him. The boy clutched Tom's sleeve as they both watched the bridge that had stood for so many years crumble into broken pieces. By afternoon, nothing remained. The posts had been ripped out of the lake. The planks had been piled like waste. The water rippled where the bridge once crossed. Tom stood silent, his face pale. His grandson tugged at his arm, asking why they destroyed it. Tom could not answer. His chest felt hollow. When the machines left, the shore looked empty. The space where the bridge had been was only bare water now. Tom sat down on the grass, staring at the lake. Memories filled his mind, his father hammering the first nails, his grandson's laughter, his own quiet evenings at sunset. All of it felt broken. That night Tom could not sleep. He walked outside again and looked at the dark water. The stars reflected on the surface, but the lake no longer looked peaceful to him. He felt anger and sorrow mixed together. The HOA had not asked, they had not cared, they had simply taken away something precious. The next morning, Tom visited the HOA office. He asked why they had destroyed the bridge without his permission. The board members gave short answers. They said the bridge was unsafe. They said the new resort needed a better view. They spoke of rules and designs, not of respect or history. Tom left the office with his hands clenched. He knew now that they would not listen. To them, the bridge was just wood in the way of their plan. To him, it had been the heart of the lake. He realized that while they thought they had power, they did not understand who truly controlled the land and the water. Back at home, Tom sat by the window. His grandson came and asked if the bridge would ever return. Tom placed his hand on the boy's shoulder and said softly, "One day." But inside, Tom's thoughts were deeper. He remembered the old stone dam at the far end of the lake, a dam his grandfather had built long before the HOA even existed. The lake was not natural. Without that dam, there would be no water for their resort. Tom had cared for the dam all his life, just as his father had before him. The HOA had forgotten, or maybe they never knew. Tom looked toward the hills where the dam lay hidden. A quiet plan began to form in his mind, though he did not yet act. For now, he only sat by the shore, watching the place where his bridge once stretched across the water, and he promised himself that the HOA would one day understand what they had done. The lake looked different after the bridge was gone. Tom still woke early, as he always had, but when he looked across the water he no longer saw the wooden path leading to the other side. He only saw the wide empty stretch of water. It made the mornings feel hollow. The birds still sang, the sun still rose, but something inside him felt missing. Across the lake, change was happening quickly. The HOA had been working for months on a large resort project. Big trucks came and went, carrying heavy supplies. Workers hammered, drilled, and lifted tall beams into place. Each week, something new appeared. At first, it was a row of small villas with shiny windows. Next came a wide deck that stretched over the water. Then came bright signs, painted in gold letters, telling people that this was a luxury resort. By summer, the place was busy. Guests came from the city to spend weekends by the lake. They wore new clothes, carried expensive bags, and laughed loudly as they walked to the water. Music played from the decks. Lights glowed at night. The quiet lake where Tom had once fished in peace was now filled with voices, movement, and noise. Tom watched from his shore. He sat in his old chair by the water and listened to the sound of boats buzzing. He saw people diving from the swimming platform. He saw the villas filled with families who had no idea what the lake truly was. The HOA board stood proudly on the deck, smiling at the guests and speaking about the success of their project. But Tom knew something they did not. The lake was not natural. Long before the town had grown, Tom's grandfather had built a stone dam across the narrow end of the valley. The dam stopped the river from flowing away and created the wide body of water that everyone now called the lake. Without that dam, there would be no lake, no resort, no guests, and no boats. The valley would return to dry land, with only a stream winding through it. Tom's grandfather had taught him about the dam when he was young. He showed Tom the heavy stone gate and the lever hidden behind an oak beam. He explained how the gate controlled the water, how opening it slowly allowed a steady flow for the farms below, and how opening it fully would let the entire lake drain away. The dam had been cared for by Tom's family ever since. The HOA never asked about the dam. They built their resort, painted their signs, and filled their villas without once thinking of where the water came from. They believed the lake was simply there, natural and eternal. Tom never told them otherwise. He had no reason to share the truth, and he felt it was not their right to know. Still, watching the resort fill with laughter and pride after they had destroyed his bridge hurt him deeply. The bridge had been part of his family's story, but the HOA had torn it down as if it was nothing. Now they stood on the far shore celebrating their success, while Tom sat alone on his side of the lake, staring at the place where the bridge once touched the water. One afternoon, Tom decided to walk closer. He took a small boat and rowed across to the opposite bank. When he reached the resort, he stepped onto the deck and looked around. The villas were shining, the swimming platform was busy with children jumping into the water, and the board members were walking proudly among the guests. One of the board members, a tall man with sharp glasses, saw Tom and walked over. "Welcome," the man said with a polite smile. "Do you want to look around our resort? It is one of the finest in the region." Tom looked at the water under the deck. He thought of his bridge. He thought of his grandfather building the dam. He thought of his grandson asking if the bridge would ever return. Then he raised his eyes and answered, "I already know this lake better than anyone. My family has cared for it longer than you have been here." The board member laughed lightly, as if Tom had told a small joke. "Yes, of course," he said, before quickly moving on to greet another guest. Tom stood there for a moment longer. No one cared to hear his words. To the board, he was just an old man standing on their deck. To the guests, he was invisible. He returned to his boat and rowed back slowly, each stroke heavy with thought. Back on his shore, Tom walked to the dam. The structure stood firm, just as it had for decades. Moss grew on the stones, but the gate remained strong. The lever waited silently under the oak beam. Tom placed his hand on the cool stone and felt the quiet power of it. One simple movement could change everything. He pulled his hand away and sat on a nearby rock. He thought of the past. His father had repaired the dam many times. His grandfather had designed it carefully. The lake had always been in their hands. The water was not just a lake, it was their responsibility, their heritage. Without the dam, the resort would be nothing but empty houses facing a dry valley. The thought stayed with Tom as days passed. He watched the resort grow busier and louder. Boats sped across the water, leaving waves that slapped against his shore. Music played late into the night. Guests shouted with joy, never knowing that the water under their boats existed only because one family had kept it alive. Tom's grandson asked him often about the bridge. "Will you build it again, Grandpa?" the boy asked. Tom always answered softly, "One day." But in his mind, Tom was no longer thinking only about the bridge. He was thinking about the dam. He was thinking about the lever. He was thinking about how quickly the resort would fall silent if the water vanished. He did not act yet, but a plan was forming. It was not a plan of anger alone. It was a plan of justice. The HOA had taken from him without respect. They had built their dream on land and water that did not belong to them. One day soon, Tom knew, they would learn the truth of the lake and the dam. The lake was quiet in the early morning. Mist rose slowly from the surface, drifting across the water like a thin blanket. Tom sat on his porch with a cup of warm tea in his hands. His grandson still slept inside, but Tom had grown used to waking with the sun. He looked across the lake and saw the resort on the far side. Even at dawn, lights glowed from the villas. Soon music and noise would fill the air again, just as it did every day. Tom set down his cup and rubbed his hands together. His eyes moved from the resort to the far end of the valley where the dam stood. The thought of the dam had been on his mind for weeks. He could not escape it. Every time he saw the resort shining, he remembered the heavy stone lever hidden under the oak beam. He remembered his grandfather's words, telling him that the water could be drained if the lever was opened fully. At first, Tom told himself he would never do such a thing. He was not a man who liked conflict. He preferred peace, fishing, and quiet days. But the more he thought about the bridge, the more his heart hardened. The bridge had not only been wood and nails. It had been a memory of his father, a joy for his grandson, and a part of the land itself. The HOA had destroyed it without care. They had laughed at his words. They had turned his lake into their profit. One evening, Tom decided to attend another HOA board meeting. He hoped, even now, to find a way to reach them. He stood before the board members in their suits and ties. He explained calmly that the bridge had been important to his family. He asked again for their help to rebuild it. He promised to maintain it well so it would not trouble anyone. The board members listened, but their eyes showed no respect. One woman cleared her throat and said, "The bridge does not match the image of our resort. We cannot approve something that lowers the value of the property." Another man added, "You must understand that progress requires change. Old things must sometimes be removed for the good of the community." Tom felt his chest tighten. He asked, "What about my family's good? What about our history?" The board members exchanged quick glances. Then the man with glasses leaned forward. "We all must sacrifice. That bridge was in the way. Now it is gone. The resort is stronger without it." Tom left the meeting without another word. He walked slowly through the streets, his hands in his pockets. Their words rang in his ears. Sacrifice, they had said, but the sacrifice had been his alone. They had lost nothing. They had gained money, houses, and pride. He had lost a part of his life. Back at the lake, Tom stood by the water. The moon reflected on the surface, but instead of calm beauty he saw only emptiness. His grandson came to his side, holding a small wooden toy boat. The boy asked softly, "Grandpa, when will we have our bridge again?" Tom knelt and hugged the child. He wanted to say tomorrow. He wanted to promise it would rise soon. But he only whispered, "One day." His eyes looked toward the dam. That night Tom could not sleep. He walked along the shore until he reached the dam. The stones looked dark in the moonlight. The water pressed heavily against the gate, steady and powerful. Tom placed his hand on the cold surface. He thought of his grandfather teaching him how the gate worked. He thought of how simple it would be to open it fully. The water would pour out, and by the next day the resort would stand above a dry valley. He pulled back his hand and sat on the grass. His mind wrestled with itself. Part of him said it was too much, that it would cause trouble he could not control. Another part of him said it was justice, that it was the only way the HOA would ever understand. The next morning, Tom rose with tired eyes. He went about his day as usual, feeding his animals, cutting wood, and repairing tools. But every task felt empty. His thoughts kept returning to the dam. He remembered the sound of the machines crushing his bridge. He remembered the board members smiling while dismissing his words. He remembered the laughter from the resort that filled the air while his shore stood silent. 3 days later, Tom made his choice. He would act. He did not feel anger alone. He felt a clear purpose. If the HOA could not respect the history of the land, then they should see what the land truly was without the dam. They believed they held power, but the truth was that his family had always held it. That evening, Tom prepared. He took a lantern, a heavy rope, and gloves. He walked quietly along the shore until he reached the dam. The valley was still. Only the sound of water rushing under the small outlet filled the air. The stars above shone bright, watching silently. Tom set the lantern down and moved the oak beam that hid the lever. The beam creaked as he lifted it aside. The stone lever stood firm, waiting. He touched it, feeling its rough surface. His grandfather had touched the same stone, his father too. Now it was his turn. He hesitated. His mind filled with memories of the bridge. He saw his father hammering nails. He saw himself as a child, running across the planks. He saw his grandson laughing at the splash of fish below. All of it was gone because of the HOA. The pain returned, but so did the strength. Tom pulled the lever slightly. The gate groaned. A stronger rush of water poured out, louder than before. He stopped and listened. The sound was powerful, like a voice from the earth itself. He pushed the lever a little more. The water thundered. His heart pounded. Then he paused again. He knew once the gate was opened fully, there would be no return until the lake was empty. He looked back toward his house, where his grandson slept. He thought of the resort on the far side, shining with lights. He thought of the silence that would fall when the water was gone. Tom let go of the lever. Not yet. The decision was made in his heart, but the action could wait for the right moment. He replaced the oak beam, picked up his lantern, and walked home. As he lay in bed, his eyes stared at the ceiling. His mind was calm in a way it had not been for weeks. The plan was clear. The resort had taken his bridge. Soon, he would show them the true cost of ignoring the man who held the key to the water. The sky was pale when Tom rose from his bed. The air felt heavy, as if the day itself carried weight. He ate no breakfast, only drank a small cup of tea. His grandson still slept, his small toy boat resting on the windowsill. Tom looked at the boy's peaceful face and then turned his eyes toward the valley. Today was the day. The resort across the lake was already waking. Early guests stepped onto the deck to watch the sun rise. Boats bumped gently at the docks. Music had not started yet, but voices carried faintly across the water. The HOA board was likely preparing for another busy day of welcoming visitors. To them, the lake was a treasure that could never be taken away. Tom walked along the path to the dam. He carried a lantern even though the morning light was rising, and he wore thick gloves for the work ahead. His steps were steady. Each footfall on the dirt path felt final, as if the land itself knew change was coming. Birds scattered as he approached, and the sound of rushing water grew louder. The dam stood tall, its stones dark with age but strong. The gate at its center rumbled quietly as the steady stream of water flowed out, feeding the river below. Tom had visited this place countless times, always to maintain it, never to change it. Today was different. Today the dam would no longer hold back the lake. He set the lantern down on a flat rock. He pulled away the oak beam that hid the lever. The beam groaned as it moved aside. The heavy stone lever waited in silence, the same lever his grandfather had once shown him. Tom placed his hands on it and felt the cold surface press against his gloves. For a moment he closed his eyes. He remembered his bridge, now gone. He remembered the machines tearing the wood apart while he stood helpless on the shore. He remembered the laughter from the resort, the words of the board dismissing his history as if it had no meaning. He remembered his grandson's question, "When will we have our bridge again?" His eyes opened. The answer was here. With a deep breath, Tom pulled. The lever resisted at first, but then the stone groaned and shifted. The gate below creaked open wider. A heavy rush of water surged out, louder than before. The dam trembled slightly as the force of the current grew stronger. Tom pulled again, harder this time. The lever moved further. The gate opened wider. Water poured out in a roaring stream. The calm lake behind the dam shifted as the level began to sink. Ripples spread across the surface. Birds rose into the sky, startled by the sudden noise. Tom stood firm, both hands gripping the lever. He gave one final pull. The gate swung fully open. At once, the lake began to drain with unstoppable force. The roar of water filled the valley like thunder. A mighty river rushed below, tearing through rocks and earth. On the far side of the lake, the resort was alive with confusion. Guests shouted as boats tilted in the sinking water. The swimming platform cracked as the water dropped beneath it. Children cried as parents pulled them to safety. The HOA board ran to the shore, pointing and shouting orders, but nothing could stop what was happening. Hour by hour, the water fell lower. The wide blue lake became smaller with each passing moment. Fish flopped in the shallows, caught in the mud. Reeds bent as the water abandoned them. The once proud surface shimmered only in patches as pools separated from each other. Tom watched from the dam. His face was calm, though his heart pounded. He had done what his family alone had the power to do. He had opened the gate, and the lake was returning to the valley it once had been. By midday, the resort stood above cracked ground where water had been only hours before. Boats lay tipped on their sides in the mud. The swimming deck was broken. Villas that had been built to overlook shining water now looked out on a wide stretch of dry earth. Guests packed their things quickly, leaving in a stream of cars. The resort was silent except for the shouts of the board as they argued and panicked. Tom's grandson came running to the dam, his eyes wide with wonder. "Grandpa," the boy said, "the lake is gone." Tom placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. "The water will return one day. But people must learn to respect what gives them life. They thought they owned the lake. They forgot who cared for it. Now they will remember." Together they walked back to the house. The boy asked many questions, but Tom spoke little. His mind was filled with thoughts of the resort's silence, the panic of the board, and the truth of what had been shown. That evening, Tom stood on his porch. The lake was no longer there. The air smelled of damp earth, and the valley stretched wide and empty. He felt no joy, only a quiet sense of balance. The HOA had destroyed his bridge in the name of progress. Now their resort stood powerless, built on land that had lost its treasure. At the resort, the board gathered in a meeting room. Their voices rose in anger. "We cannot host guests without the lake," one man said. "The property value has dropped," another added. "All our money is wasted," a third cried. They spoke of losses, contracts, and complaints. Not once did they speak of Tom's bridge or of the family who had kept the lake alive. But deep inside, they all knew the truth. The water had not been theirs. It had been held by a dam they did not control. And the man who did control it had just shown them how fragile their dream truly was. When night fell, the resort was dark. No music played, no lights shone across the valley. Only the empty ground stretched where the lake had once been. Tom sat in silence, looking at the dry land. He knew the water could return, but not until respect was given. The bridge was gone, but the power of the dam remained. And Tom, quiet and steady, held the key to both. The next morning, the valley looked strange. Where once a shining blue lake had stretched across the land, now there was only mud, cracked earth, and small streams winding through the ground. Fish glistened in shallow pools. Boats that had once floated proudly now rested on their sides in the dirt. The resort, built to face the water, seemed out of place and broken. Tom stood on his porch, his grandson beside him. The boy looked at the empty valley with wide eyes. "Grandpa," he asked, "will the lake come back?" Tom rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Yes, it can come back," he said quietly. "But only when people learn to treat it with respect." The resort across the valley was no longer filled with laughter. The lights that once glowed late into the night were dark. Cars had left in long lines, carrying guests who no longer wished to stay at a resort without a lake. The HOA board members remained, their faces pale with worry. They gathered on the cracked ground, pointing at the dry earth and arguing with each other. By afternoon, word spread through the town. People whispered that the Great Lake was gone. Some were shocked, some curious, and some quietly pleased that the proud board had lost its treasure. Many of them knew the lake had always been tied to Tom's family, but they had never seen proof until now. Now they saw clearly who held the true power of the water. Later that day, 2 board members came to Tom's house. They wore neat clothes, but their faces looked tired. One of them, the man with sharp glasses, spoke first. "Tom," he said, "we need to talk about the lake." Tom did not invite them inside. He stood at the door with his grandson holding his hand. "The lake is not gone," Tom said calmly. "It has only been released. It can return, but not without respect." The woman beside the man frowned. "We invested millions into that resort. Without the lake, it is worthless. You must close the gate and bring the water back. Do you understand what is at stake?" Tom's eyes were steady. "Do you understand what you destroyed when you tore down my bridge?" The man adjusted his glasses, shifting uncomfortably. "The bridge was unsafe," he said quickly. "It did not match the design of our community." Tom shook his head. "The bridge was part of my family. It carried history. You broke it as if it was nothing. Now you see how it feels to lose something you built your life around." The board members exchanged nervous glances. The woman's voice softened. "What do you want, Tom? What will it take to bring the water back?" Tom looked at his grandson. The boy's eyes were hopeful, as if he too wanted to hear the answer. Tom turned back to the board members and spoke slowly. "You will rebuild my bridge, just as it was before. You will respect the land and the history it carries. You will remember that this lake exists because of my family. If you agree to these things, I will close the gate and allow the water to return." The man opened his mouth to argue, but the woman raised her hand. She understood that they had no choice. Without the lake, their resort was nothing. "We agree," she said quietly. Tom nodded once. "Then I will keep my word. But if you ever break yours again, remember that the dam will always answer to me." The board members left without another word. Tom watched them go, then turned to his grandson. The boy smiled brightly. Does this mean the bridge will come back? Yes, Tom said. It will rise again. The next morning, Tom walked once more to the dam. The stones stood firm as always, the water still rushing out in a powerful stream. He placed his hands on the lever and pulled carefully. The gate groaned as it shifted back into place. Slowly, the water began to rise again, filling the valley little by little. For days, the stream widened, the pools joined, and the cracked earth disappeared under rippling waves. The boats, once stuck in mud, floated again. Birds returned to the surface. The valley was once more a lake, shining in the sunlight. At the same time, workers arrived at Tom's shore. They carried wood, nails, and tools. Under Tom's watchful eye, they began to rebuild the bridge. Each board was placed with care. Each post was set firmly into the water. The sound of hammers filled the air, but this time it was not destruction. It was restoration. Tom's grandson helped carry small nails and watched every step with excitement. Day by day, the bridge grew longer until at last it reached the far shore once again. When it was finished, Tom placed his hand on the railing and walked across slowly, feeling each step with pride. His grandson ran ahead, laughing as he always had. The resort returned to life, but it was no longer the same. The board members never forgot the lesson they had learned. They knew now that the water was not theirs to claim. It belonged to the land, to the dam, and to the family that had built it. They treated Tom with respect and never questioned his place again. One evening, as the sun set across the water, Tom stood in the middle of the bridge. The sky was painted with colors of orange and gold. The lake shimmered with beauty once more. His grandson stood beside him, smiling. "Grandpa," the boy said, "the lake is back, and so is the bridge." Tom smiled gently. "Yes," he said. "And now they understand. The lake is not just water. It is memory, history, and life. Those who forget that will always lose what they think they own." The wind stirred softly, carrying the scent of water across the valley. The lake was whole again, and with it, Tom's heart felt whole too. He had defended his family's legacy, and he had shown the world that respect for the past must never be forgotten. And so the bridge stood strong once more, a symbol not only of wood and nails but of justice, memory, and the quiet strength of one man who refused to be ignored.